At the end of his message, Vahe Berberian sent a message. Arsene asked what message he would like to send. All the people from the schools here, think about what message you want to send to Vahe. So if you come with a consensus, we'll pass that message on to Vahe. All right. So we have our speakers here. We're going to take a few minutes to ask some questions, and then if there is time, I will open it up to the audience. I'm going to ask with a question to Lilit, because there was something you said that really caught my attention, and that is code switching, which is an academic way of saying kids switch languages between English and Armenian in this case. Parents and often educators think of this as confusion. The kid is confused. And obviously you're making the point that no, it's not confusion, it's a strategic decision. I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit if you can.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's not just the kids that code switch. Everyone that is bilingual or multilingual, I'm sure every single one in this audience does code switch, and we do it naturally and we rarely even notice it. The reason why I try to highlight kids code switching is to just make more of a point how this is not just random. And when I say not random, I mean it on several levels. First, something that I didn't really address in the presentation is it's not random even on the level of structures and grammar of each language. For example, if a 4-year-old girl says, oh, I'm still nekareling, you think of it, oh, poor kid, she's confused. She just took this Armenian word, mixed it with English grammar. But what you can see there, the underlying, she takes this ing ending, which comes from a verb, and adds it on the word նկարել. Եվ բոլորս էլ գիտենք նկարել հայերենում նույնպես բայ է, այսինքն 3-4 տարեկան երեխան արդեն հասկանում է, որ պիտի վերցնի բայի վերջավորությունը անգլերենից ու ավելացնի հայերենում բային. Does a 3-year-old know what a noun, pronoun, verb is? No, but at this stage they already have the analytical capacity to understand how exactly to mix and switch these languages. So that's one sense when I mean it non-random, it's very structural linguistically. Another case when I say it's non-random is based on context, like we saw in the examples. Kids switch between the two, as I'm doing, as I'm answering the question. Երբ որ երեխաները խոսում են այն աղջկա հետ, որ ավելի լավ անգլերեն գիտեր, սկսեց անգլերեն խոսել։ Երբ խոսում են մյուս երեխայի հետ, որը լավ անգլերեն գիտի, սկսում է անգլերեն խոսել։ Եվ այս լեզուների միջև փոփոխությունը կարող է լինել նաև ըստ թեմայից. Maybe there's a word that just expresses something in Armenian so much better than in English. Can you find an English equivalent of John? Ոնց ես? Or something. So there's this like even cultural things that you just cannot translate. So kids also know that translation is never perfectly equivalent from one culture, knowledge, understanding into another. This, of course, is a very broad theme, but I hope at least this much was enough to convince you that code switching is not a confusion. Don't be afraid of it. Don't look at it as a negative thing, but just think of it as a valuable asset of kids showcasing their highly proficient linguistic skills.
Thank you. Thank you, Lilit. Dr. Baibourtian, you gave an overview and highlighted the importance of the diaspora in your presentation. Until about 30, 40 years ago, the notion of diaspora was interpreted to be something very negative, very unfortunate, with the idea of return being to the lost homeland. Until 1991, that homeland was Eastern Turkey. Now it's the Republic of Armenia. So there was that unfortunate thing associated with the notion of diaspora. But now, in the last 30 years, that has changed. Diaspora is something positive, something beautiful. Look at the poster of this event. It's a beautiful, positive image. My question is, in this process of changing, where does the homeland fit into this? If diaspora is to be celebrated, something to live in, and something important, where does the homeland fit in?
Thank you, Dr. Panossian. Let me start answering your question by telling you a very short story of advantages of diaspora and how it helps the motherland. So at the end of the World War II, when Soviet and American troops were meeting each other as allies on the Oder and Wisla rivers in Northern Europe, so a Russian officer comes and tells, look, we are going to meet our allies. Who speaks English among you? We need someone who can communicate to the Americans. And then an Armenian guy who doesn't know any word in English tells, I speak fluently English. They say, okay. And then he shouts, is there any Armenian among you? And then from the other side, an American soldier comes and says, hi, I'm whatever, and they hug and they speak fluently to each other, and the officer said, I never could guess that your English is so good. So, a vivid example of advantages of diaspora, having a diaspora for motherland. So, on a serious note, and I have a neighbor, I live in neighborhood Aygedzor in Yerevan, who claims that he was that guy from Armenia. So, there are two, we should very briefly tell that there are two origins of diaspora. One is forced, another induced. So when we had both, when Armenian merchants were building their settlements worldwide, that was induced. They were going abroad for commercial purposes, but forced, genocide, and when because of genocide a nation is spread all over the world, then naturally the prevailing philosophy is that we all need to go back to our motherland. Not only in this case, but especially in this case. So that prevailed, as you rightfully mentioned, Dr. Panossian, for very many centuries, and it's still there. But also a lot of things changed, and especially on the present contemporary period, when we take a look at the situation, we see that diaspora formed as a strong entity, mechanism, and also realized its potential, its importance, and more importantly, the motherland realizes how important is diaspora, and it's a two-way traffic, both sides. But there is one important factor: the resource that keeps the diaspora functioning, living, is the motherland. Because without motherland, diaspora cannot survive. This is absolute truth. So both sides know about its strengths, about its advantages, and today we say, not necessarily we appeal, especially for a new Armenia, we say that it's opened up for everyone. All Armenians living everywhere in the world, and including in California. We not necessarily say go back to Armenia to live. We say make bonds with Armenia if you don't. Make bonds for your children. One foot here, another foot there will work. If many people would love to go to settle in Armenia, great. But the others also, we appeal to them that do something. Even when we talk about establishing businesses in Armenia, the point is that along with businesses, the parents will make a bond for their children with Armenia, with the new value system, etc. And one last point. So when Velvet Revolution took place in Armenia, there was a completely new phenomenon that we faced with this revolution. Prior to the revolution, so the thinking, etc., diaspora Armenia was somehow developing in a very conventional way. And even when the independent Armenia emerged, so it was perceived in a conventional way. But when the Velvet Revolution took place, diaspora and Armenia were on the same page in terms of participation. And diaspora also participated in the Velvet Revolution. And from this Los Angeles, you all remember what was happening in Glendale in Los Angeles. In this way, the nation also, in a very peculiar way, symbolic way, was united. So that would be my very brief answer.
Anahit, քեզի հարցումը հարցնեմ. That was the secret note that cut it short. Anahit, քեզի հարցումը հարցնեմ. You spoke about relevance. You spoke about accessible of the language, which is crucial. But you also spoke about breaking taboos and pushing boundaries. And there is something appealing in that for especially younger watchers of humor or listeners of humor. Are any of these comedians concerned about the criticism that they are facing from the community, because they are, from the traditional elements of the community, they are facing criticism. Some taboos are not meant to be broken, et cetera, et cetera. I would like you to say a few words about that, if you don't mind.
Of course. I think they are aware of the criticism that they receive. However, I think they feel pride in the task of language transmission, so they do not let the criticism get to them. During interviews, I had participating comedians say, of course, the older generation does not like it when I do this. However, I feel like it's necessary for the newer generation to be involved and to watch and know that Armenian can be used as a language of the future. Another comedian had a quote about how he had a intimate set that he spoke about in Armenian, and he actually was criticized by his family for that, which is also interesting to know, to see. And I think this is why it's so relevant, because like another quote that I had included in my presentation, comedians take this Amot culture that we have in the Armenian household, like
Amot culture. Okay,
Amot culture, Amota mi khosa dra masin, kam Amota mi ara, dance chenanum, and they talk about it because that's exactly what the youth needs in order to see the language as a living present-day language, and it's accessible because it's on all social media platforms. These comedians are using it on Facebook, on Instagram, and Snapchat. And not only that, Vahe Berberian also touched about it when he said it's not using the sophisticated language. They're using the low-level colloquial language that heritage speakers understand. They're using the kitchen talk. They're using the home talk. They're saying khorovats and khoanots and all those things. And yet, they are doing it in a way that's transmitting the language for the future.
Thank you. Գնանք ասնութեու մասին ժամեր խոսիլ, բայց գացեմ թե պետք է փակենք. I will take actually two very short questions from the audience, and I would like to hear what message you have to Vahe Berberian from the younger members of the audience. I will take two very quick questions. A reminder: a question is a short sentence with a question mark at the end. Okay? Is anyone want to ask a question to our panelists? No? Everything is clear. Negachiga. Okay. There is Armen. Guka, Mike, Guka. Yeah. Just wait, make like that.
Ես ցեզ համար հարց ունի, բարոն, ինչպես մենք կրնանք հայախոսությունը եւ հայ ապրումը պահպանել այս դիասպորայի մեջ, որովհետեւ ճիշտ է, որ մենք գոդարվենք կոր։
Շնորհակալ եմ հարցից համար։ Ուրեմն մի քանի ձևեր կան, որ անպայման պետք է օգտագործենք լեզուն եւ պահպանելու եւ ընդհանրապես մեր ինքնությունը պահպանելու համար։ Առաջինը այն նպատակն է, որ այսօր մենք հավաքվել ենք այսօր, օրինակ Նարեկացի կենտրոնի Նարեկացի ամբիոնի Հոբելյան 50-ամյակը նշելու, այս առիթով նախ շնորհավորում եմ բոլորիդ եւ պրոֆեսոր Քաուին ջերմորեն, այսպիսի կենտրոնները, սա շատ բացառիկ կենտրոն է, լեզվի եւ մշակույթի, այսպիսի կենտրոն ունենալով եւ ուժեղացնելով, զարգացնելով, հենց մենք նպաստում ենք լեզվի պահպանմանը։ Մյուսը, դպրոցները, վարժարանները այստեղի։ Շատ կարևոր է հայկական լեզուն, հայոց լեզուն, ոչ միայն մասնավոր հայկական վարժարաններում զարգացնելը, նոր վարժարաններում դա ներմուծելը, բայց նաև հրաշալի ծրագրերը հանրային դպրոցներում հայերենի, ֆլակ ծրագրի մասին եմ խոսում, հայերեն եւ հայերեն դասավանդելու։ Եվ ամենակարևորը Հայաստանից եկող այդ օժանդակությունը եւ մասնավորապես հենց կապվելը Հայաստանի հետ տարբեր ձևերով երիտասարդների այնտեղ գնալը, աշխատելը, տարբեր ծրագրերում ներգրավվելը, սա գրավական է, որ լեզուն կպահպանվի, լեզուն կզարգանա եւ դուք էլ հիշեք, որ իրար հետ միշտ հայերեն խոսալը դա անհրաժեշտություն է։
Anahit, Lilit, կուզեք համարեցնել այս հարցումին շատ կարճ in 2 lines. I know the question was for Dr. Baibourtian, but yeah.
I have a note about it. One second. Addressing errors that heritage speakers make, and addressing the fact of not to be afraid to make these errors. take the comedians, for example. Most of the comedians are heritage language speakers. So if they ever feel like on stage, they will translanguage often. And Lilit talked about code switching, and translanguaging falls into that category too. So that's another way of language maintenance, not to be afraid to make mistakes. And then error correction is another big phenomena that I think Lilit can also linguistically touch upon this too. It came up in the interview with Vahe Berberian, that in order to transmit language and to learn language, you need to create a safe environment for students to learn the language. And so instead of saying che sakhalat tensmiasa, you just correct them by saying, oh, okay, yes, and in that sentence embed the correct word or form or conjugation, whatever it is that it may be. So it's also being understanding and being kind to one another, that if we are trying to speak Armenian to one another, to not call out each other on the different standards or dialects that one another speaks.
Thank you. Lilit, the last word goes to you.
Thank you. Ooh, no pressure. Just continuing on that, I think there is, speaking of pressure, sometimes it does happen to fall a lot of pressure on children growing up in diaspora versus those growing up in Armenia. Because kids who grow up in Armenia, they're never overly corrected all the time. But here, children treat Armenian as this pure, perfect language written in golden letters that you just cannot mess. So sometimes it's really hard for younger people to even try to use it because there's this fear of failure every single time. So I think this is something each generation can work on. For older generation to try to lessen that pressure, and for younger generation to use outlets like media, new movies, cartoons that are coming up from Armenia in Armenian language that are just beautifully and well done and are about like modern themes that you can just incorporate in our everyday life and not be afraid to use the language.
Teachers, please take note of that. So, message to Vahe Berberian from anyone? Richard, we really are pressed for time. Save it for the second panel, can you? Yeah. Message for Vahe Berberian from anyone? Keep on doing the good work you're doing. All right. Sorry? To Vahe Berberian. Please, that's a message. Young at heart, Professor of Panossian.
I would like to say that I agree with Vahe Berberian that there's far more to being Armenian than genocide. But I want to disagree with Vahe Berberian, saying that we should see shrinks and psychiatrists to get over it, when we see because that is a suppression of memory rather than dealing with memory. And if it's just suppression without it being resolved, then it's not a healthy outcome, I think. I think the outcome is that you have to resolve the trauma by working through it and by acceptance of what occurred. So in this sense, Mr. Berberian, I agree, we are much more than genocide, but I don't agree that there should be suppression of memory. The other thing I want to notice here is I really feel for all the teachers here. I noticed, even with interesting panels, that a very large number of our students are using their texting machines all the time. And that's the modern way, but we have to deal with that as well. Thank you.
Okay.